As a child, I was haunted by a horror film, suffering from recurring nightmares fueled by its terrifying imagery. Its lingering effects would eventually develop into an obsession that would change my life forever. The Ring was the film that gave birth to my obsession with horror movies. For that, I am grateful, even with all the sleepless nights the film gave me as a child. I watched it on YouTube back in the early days of the website, back when copyright protections were much less stringently enforced. I still remember sitting at a desk with my brother and watching the film in full. Despite viewing in broad daylight, the nightmarish imagery hooked me. Gore Verbinski and Bojan Bazelli's photography etched into my brain to recur every night for weeks. Years before my fateful viewing, the film had a similar effect on millions of viewers. The film was a remake of a similarly successful Japanese film, which had spread like a virus across East Asia. This rapid spread was in line with the thematic concepts of the original novel by Koji Suzuki, which had been adapted several times since its overwhelmingly successful release spawned a novel trilogy. An original Ring adaptation was released on Japanese television in 1995, with Hideo Nakata's adaptation released in 1998 as part of a double bill with Spiral, a sequel based on the novel of the same name by Suzuki. There was then a follow-up to Nakata's film that retconned Spiral, titled Ring 2, also directed by Nakata, and released in 1999. A third film, a prequel, titled Ring Zero Birthday, based on a short story from the short story collection of the same name by Suzuki, was directed by Norio Sarada and released in 2000. There were also two television miniseries released in 1999, one subtitled The Final Chapter, and the other a sequel miniseries titled Spiral. A South Korean adaptation titled The Ring Virus was released in 1999. Manga and radio drama adaptations were released in the 90s as well. A video game adaptation was released for the Sega Dreamcast titled The Ring Terror's Realm in 2000. The game is a survival horror Resident Evil clone developed by Asmik Ace Entertainment and published by Asmik in Japan on February 24, 2000. It also got an American release published by Infogrames on September 26, 2000, 2 years before the American release hit theaters and years before the Nakata original had a legitimate home video release in the States. This long line of adaptations across multiple forms of media spoke to the power of the original story at the heart of Suzuki's novel. The idea of a cursed videotape that kills whoever watches it in 7 days is devilishly simple. It's easy to see what drew American production companies towards it as a remake possibility. Husband and wife duo Walter F. Parks and Laurie McDonald produced the film under their Parks McDonald Productions Company, alongside production companies Bender Spink Inc. and Vertigo Entertainment. It would be distributed through DreamWorks Pictures worldwide, with Asmik Ace, the publishers of the video game in Japan, serving as distributors for the Japanese release. Looking for a director, they chose Gore Verbinski, who had come in to replace Simon Wells as director for the last 18 days of shooting on the film The Time Machine, which was also made for Parks and McDonald and distributed by DreamWorks. Verbinski was a former punk rock guitarist who had graduated from UCLA Film School in 1987. After a decade of work on commercials and music videos, including the iconic Croaking Frogs commercial for Budweiser, he wrote and directed a short film titled The Ritual in 1996. This would eventually make way for his directorial debut, the slapstick comedy film Mouse Hunt, starring Nathan Lane and Lee Evans, being released in 1997 by DreamWorks to mixed reviews but major box office success. His next film would be the comedy film The Mexican, starring Brad Pitt and Julia Roberts, released by DreamWorks in 2001. The film was met with mixed reviews once again, but delivered a respectable box office return. All of his work with DreamWorks opened the door to be able to work on his first horror film. Unlike the usual trajectory for filmmakers who find early success, usually using horror films as the low-budget pathway towards bigger and better things, Verbinski moved into the world of studio mid-budget horror filmmaking after his early success. The American horror film landscape he was entering, however, was dead. After years of studios beating the dead horse of the slasher cycle, the genre had reached parody status. There was a brief resurgence of the genre after the success of Kevin Williamson and Wes Craven's Scream gave birth to a mini-cycle of postmodern, meta-self-aware teenage horror films, but by 2002, this cycle had already died out, so Hollywood began to look overseas, and seeing the success of the J-horror boom, attempted to bring that home to American audiences. Aaron Kruger, the screenwriter for Scream 3, would be brought in to adapt the screenplay, with famed script doctor Scott Frank brought in for revisions. The screenplay initially took place in Boston. However, this was eventually changed to the more thematically appropriate Seattle area. Naomi Watts was cast in the lead role after her breakout success in David Lynch's Mulholland Drive, what had initially been conceived as a television pilot in line with her previous work on low-budget horror films, small television roles, and made-for-TV work, eventually blossomed into her breakthrough role in an award-winning film. This success in Lynch's film opened Hollywood's doors to Watts. She was drawn to the Ring's core idea, stating in an interview with the Detroit Free Press, quote, "I just love the idea that this movie starts out like Scream and then turns into this entirely different thing. There's none of the usual gore or gags and none of the usual cliches. Just this overwhelming atmosphere of dread and this mystery that my character is determined to solve." End quote. Verbinski was drawn to Watts due to her relative obscurity. Mulholland Drive wasn't a major box office hit after all, and her great performance in that film. He wanted obscure actors so that the film could be discovered, helping the style of the horror to have more effect on the audience. This would lead him to cast another even more obscure actor alongside Watts, with the New Zealand actor Martin Henderson cast as her ex-husband Noah. Brian Cox would also join the cast alongside David Dorfman, DeVay Chase, Raquel Bella, Amber Tamblyn, and Jane Alexander. The crew would feature Bojan Bazeli as cinematographer, known for his work on cult horror films such as Pumpkinhead and Body Snatchers, as well as having worked with Naomi Watts previously on the 1998 Marshall Herskovitz film Dangerous Beauty. Craig Wood would serve as editor, having previously edited Verbinski's previous two feature films, his short film, and lots of his commercial work, including the aforementioned award-winning Budweiser Frog commercial. He also worked alongside director Alex Proyas as an additional editor on The Crow, as well as some of the director's other early work. Frequent Tim Burton collaborator Tom Duffeld would serve as production designer. Set decoration would be helmed by Rosemary Bradenberg, with costume design by Julie Weiss, and art direction helmed by Amrickson Kokar and Patrick Sullivan Jr. Legendary composer Hans Zimmer would provide an original score. Horror film legend Rick Baker would be a special effects makeup artist on the film. Benita Allen, first assistant director on Verbinski's previous films, as well as the Clive Barker horror film Lord of Illusions, would reprise her role as the first AD. This team would provide Verbinski not only with numerous familiar faces and industry veterans, but also veterans of the horror genre, a genre he was excited to be working within. Stating in an interview with the Detroit Free Press, quote, "I'm a big fan of horror films, but there are ones that simply shock you and ones that operate more subversively. They have a particular psychological manipulation going on that the viewer is not completely aware of. When they work, they have a tremendous effect. Those films stay with you longer because they get under your skin." End quote. The film was shot in Washington State and Oregon, utilizing techniques that allowed for a distinct gray, blue, green color grading to strengthen the film's atmosphere by better showcasing the strong and at times surrealistic imagery that Verbinski and Bazeli were attempting to achieve. The film was released on October 18, 2002, and received positive critical reception and made a big impact at the box office. Off its reported budget of $48 million, the film made over $249 million at the worldwide box office. It became a sensation that gave rise to a new era in Hollywood studio horror filmmaking, an era defined by East Asian horror remakes, with films such as The Grudge, Pulse, and Dark Water soon being remade in America as well. These would serve as a counterbalance to the other rising form of horror filmmaking in the early 21st century, torture porn. The The film would have its initial home video release on DVD and VHS on March 4th, 2003, alongside the first legitimate home video release for North America of Hideo Nakata's Ring film, now having its title transliterated to Ring-U. Eventually, the film would have a Blu-ray release on September 11th, 2012, and then get a 4K release from Shout Factory as part of its The Ring Collection on March 19th, 2024. There would be 2 sequels produced for the film, as well as a tie-in short film that takes place between the first and second film. The legacy of the film is undisputed as one of the most iconic horror films of the 21st century, featuring one of the century's most memorable villains. Now, with this context being laid out, let me give you my thoughts on the film. Let's explore The Ring. Erin Kruger didn't have to do much to adapt the story for American audiences, with the major changes being related to a few more exposition scenes. The mystery around the origins of Sadako and her powers is much less subtle in this film. Instead, we get a more fleshed out Samara Morgan, with this being one of the major complaints people bring up about the remake in comparison to the original. I understand where this complaint is coming from, but there is still so much in the film that brings the vibe of mystery, surrealism, and uncertainty that the film doesn't suffer much from this inclusion of more exposition. The film operates both as a mystery film in which Naomi Watts' character, Rachel Keller, serves as the journalist detective that carries the narrative, as well as being a surreal horror film filled with dread-inducing imagery and spine-tingling sound design. Verbinski was inspired by the surrealist short film An Andalusian Dog for the movie within a movie. The Cursed videotape utilizes a similar style for its imagery and internal emotional narrative logic. This tape at first seems to contain disparate imagery filmed in a slick Hollywood style, meant simply to unnerve the audience, but as the mystery slowly unravels, the haunting implications of the images on the tape become clearer. Now, this is another major point of contention for fans of Nakata's film. They believe that this slick Hollywood imagery in the video doesn't make sense for what is supposed to be a mental projection of fragments of memories. Initially, this is a critique I agreed with, but over time I have grown to appreciate Verbinski's approach to the tape. It feels like a dream in the way it is constructed, like Samara's dream, recreating imagery that has haunted her, but in a new context, one that bleeds into the rest of the film. Verbinski and Bazzelli approached the photography of the film with this dreamlike logic in place, with lots of beautiful out-of-place imagery that continually adds to the dread. Rachel is haunted by Samara's life and death, nightmares now recurring over 7 days as she desperately seeks to uncover the truth about the tape. This is a handsome film, very well shot and filled with iconic imagery. The usage of color correction sticks out and makes the imagery feel that much more potent. I love how this approach to cinematography is matched by the sound design and the excellent choices of location. The sound design has tons of discordant moments that send a shiver down the audience's spine, cringe-inducing moments like fingernails running down a chalkboard, along with perfectly timed jump scare stings. We get the early moments that feel like a teenage horror film, as Naomi Watts pointed out, but then over time, the combination of the creepy sound design, haunting imagery, dread-inducing Hans Zimmer score, beautifully appropriate locations, and intriguing mystery narrative wears us down, and we are immersed into a much more disturbing slow burn approach that haunts you for much longer. It's not that I don't like Nakata's film, I do a lot. It's just that I believe some critics and fans denigrate the American film to prop up the Japanese version. This in most cases would be fine, as the other Japanese horror remakes that littered Hollywood in the aftermath of The Ring would be much less creatively inspired. But with this film, these critiques miss out on all the interesting choices Verbinski made. This is not a lazy cash grab remake, it is a unique vision executed well. The film is not simply a visual treat with excellent sound design and music. Instead, it has a strong weight to it as well. It is emotionally anchored by an excellent performance by Naomi Watts. She has a heavy burden to carry in this film, which she effortlessly does. It makes the scares feel more impactful, the mystery more compelling, and the emotional stakes more real. Her interactions with Martin Henderson feel like a real ex-couple, and her relationship with her son is compellingly strange. He is a strange kid, but one that she cares for. She doesn't know the best way to parent, but tries her best. She goes through hell to save him, not herself. This is the emotional current that carries the narrative. The other performances are pretty good. You could argue that Aiden is a clear pull from The Sixth Sense, but there is something about his performance that is so off-kilter that it works, and has inspired many other creepy kids in horror movies. There are several elements of the plot that were executed so well that they eventually became overused cliches, such as Aiden's creepy drawings. I think this might hurt the viewing for people who come to the film later on, but that first viewing was uniquely haunting in a way I will forever cherish. The effects are cool, with the look of the corpses after Samara is done with them being particularly ghoulish. The effects surrounding Samara feel simultaneously grimy and unreal, a feeling of tangible physical presence while also having this strange, thin digital veneer. It matches the themes of the film very well, with a gross, rotting corpse being digitally transmitted well after death, sending a message of pure hatred and death. I love this film. It developed my love and obsession with horror films. It indirectly led to the creation of this channel and my pursuit towards becoming a filmmaker. I appreciate the film on multiple levels, both on a level of pure nostalgia and on a level of appreciation for the pure filmmaking craft on display. There are critiques you can levy on the film, but I find a lot of them to be unfair or overly dismissive. I am a huge fan of East Asian horror cinema, and I understand the hesitation and frustration that comes with the idea of an American remake of a beloved film. But The Ring is the best of these films, and by a large margin. It is a good film and one that I will never stop defending. That's all for this week's video. Thank you all so much for watching, and see you next week.